September 1st, 1939. The world changed forever. Germany launched a blitzkrieg, or lightning war, against Poland, using speed and power never seen before. Britain and France, having promised to protect Poland, declared war on Germany. The Great Peace of the 1920s and 30s vanished in a single weekend. By 1940, the phony war ended. Germany swept through Western Europe, bypassing the impenetrable Maginot Line and capturing Paris in weeks. At Dunkirk, over 300,000 Allied soldiers were trapped against the sea. They were saved by a miracle, a fleet of tiny civilian boats. With France gone, Britain stood alone. The Battle of Britain began, a duel in the skies between the RAF and the Luftwaffe that decided the fate of the West. Winston Churchill's voice became the shield of a nation. His words turned the finest hour into a rallying cry that echoed through the bombing of the Blitz. In June 1941, Hitler made his greatest gamble, Operation Barbarossa. He turned his back on his pact with Stalin and invaded the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was vast, and its winter was lethal. The German lightning war began to freeze in the mud and snow outside of Moscow. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, tensions were boiling. Japan, seeking resources and dominance, planned a strike that would bring a sleeping giant into the war. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. In a few hours, the United States was pushed from neutrality into a global struggle for survival. 1942 was the year of the tipping point. In the Pacific, the Battle of Midway saw the U.S. Navy sink 4 Japanese carriers, breaking their naval supremacy. In North Africa, the Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel, was pushed back at El Alamein. The dream of a German-controlled Suez Canal was shattered by the British Eighth Army. But the bloodiest battle in human history was happening in the east, Stalingrad. It was house-to-house, room-to-room fighting in a city of ruins. The Red Army eventually encircled the German Sixth Army. For the first time, the invincible Nazi machine was forced to surrender an entire army group. By 1943, the Allies invaded Sicily and Italy. Mussolini's fascist regime began to crumble as the soft underbelly of Europe was pierced. The industrial might of America was now fully awake. Factories ran 24/7, producing planes, tanks, and ships at a rate the Axis could never hope to match. Women entered the workforce in millions. Rosie the Riveter became the symbol of a home front that was just as vital as the front lines. The Allies began a massive bombing campaign against German industry. Cities became targets as both sides sought to break the will of the civilian population. In the Pacific, the strategy was island hopping, bypassing heavily fortified islands to seize airfields closer and closer to the Japanese mainland. By 1944, the world was waiting for the Great Crusade. The liberation of Western Europe was being planned in secret on the shores of England. June 6, 1944. D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Over 150,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy under a wall of fire. In August, Paris was liberated. The French capital celebrated as the Nazi flags were torn down and the tricolor flew once again from the Eiffel Tower. Hitler's last gamble came in December, the Battle of the Bulge, a surprise winter counteroffensive designed to split the Allied lines and capture Antwerp. Surrounded at Bastogne, American paratroopers refused to surrender. Their famous one-word reply to the German demand? Nuts! The Bulge was flattened. The German army had burned its last reserves of fuel and men. The end of the war in Europe was now a matter of when, not if. As the Allies pushed into Germany, they discovered the true horror of the Nazi regime, the concentration camps and the reality of the Holocaust. The world saw the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others. It was a crime so vast that it required a new word: genocide. By April 1945, the Soviet Union reached Berlin. The city became a graveyard for the 1,000-year Reich that had lasted only 12. April 1945. The 1,000-year Reich was collapsing into a few square blocks of Berlin. The Soviet Red Army fought street by street, reaching the heart of the Nazi machine. Inside his underground bunker, Adolf Hitler realized the end had come. On April 30th, he took his own life, leaving his remaining generals to face the music. May 8th, 1945, VE Day, Victory in Europe. The continent erupted in joy, but the celebration was bittersweet. Millions would never return home. As the guns fell silent in Europe, the world's attention turned back to the Pacific. Japan was battered and burning. but its leaders refused to accept unconditional surrender. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa proved that the closer the Allies got to Japan, the more fanatical the resistance became. The cost in lives was skyrocketing. Kamikaze, divine wind. Japanese pilots began flying their planes directly into Allied ships, turning themselves into human missiles in a desperate bid to stop the invasion. In the United States, a secret project was reaching its climax. In the deserts of New Mexico, the Manhattan Project was about to change the nature of war forever. July 16, 1945, the Trinity Test, the first atomic explosion. Oppenheimer famously recalled the words of the Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." President Harry Truman faced an impossible choice: invade Japan and lose 1 million men, or use the new weapon to force a sudden end to the war. The order was given. The B-29 bomber, Enola Gay, took off for the city of Hiroshima, carrying a single bomb that held the power of the sun. August 6, 1945. Hiroshima was vaporized in an instant. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. The scale of destruction was unlike anything in history. The Soviet Union also declared war on Japan, invading Manchuria. Trapped between a nuclear threat and a Russian invasion, the Japanese emperor finally intervened. August 15th, VJ Day. For the first time, the people of Japan heard the voice of their emperor on the radio, announcing that they must endure the unendurable. On September 2nd, the formal surrender was signed aboard the USS Missouri. World War II, the deadliest conflict in the history of our species, was over. The cost was staggering. Between 70 and 85 million people were dead. Cities across Europe and Asia were reduced to smoking piles of brick and ash. But from the rubble, a new world order was born. The old colonial empires of Britain and France were broken, and 2 new superpowers emerged, the USA and the USSR. To prevent such a horror from ever happening again, the nations of the world met in San Francisco to create the United Nations. The Nuremberg trials established a new principle, that following orders is no excuse for crimes against humanity. International law was rewritten in the shadow of the gallows. Europe was rebuilt through the Marshall Plan, a massive infusion of American aid that turned former enemies into the closest of allies. The war had accelerated technology by decades. Radar, jet engines, and the first computers were all products of the struggle for survival. In the Pacific, Japan was transformed from a militaristic empire into a peaceful industrial powerhouse, overseen by General Douglas MacArthur.
The Iron Curtain descended across Europe, dividing the continent into East and West for the next 40 years. The hot war was over. The Cold War had begun.
Israel was founded in 1948, providing a homeland for the survivors of the Holocaust, but also sparking new conflicts that continue to this day. The baby boom began. Soldiers returned home to start families, leading to a massive spike in population and the birth of a new, optimistic generation. We still live in the shadow of World War II. Our borders, our technologies, and our international institutions were all forged in that fire. It serves as a permanent warning of what happens when hatred goes unchecked, and when the world fails to act before it is too late. But it also shows the incredible resilience of the human spirit, the ability to rebuild from total destruction and to find hope in the dark. The veterans of the war are fading away, but their stories remain. It is our duty to remember, so that never again remains a promise, not just a slogan. 6 years of war, millions of lives, one world forever changed. The timeline of World War II is the story of how we almost lost everything, and how we started over. End World War II. The greatest conflict. Stay curious, remember the past, and thanks for watching.